Okay, so I'm going to talk about science fiction and community. So I used to do a lot of talks about community management, and I found that I was realistically boring myself. So I kind of pulled in the science fiction angle. This is mainly because I just read a shit ton of books. I read 73 last year. Coincidentally enough, I read 73 the year before, exactly, which is sort of bizarre, but I don't know, I guess I'm on a roll. I keep a list because I'm, like most people, just a wee bit obsessive compulsive about that sort of thing. So you can actually go, you can check it out, see what I've been reading. So the doctor always tells us not to worry, everything's going to be fine, not unlike some organizers of, say, certain conferences with, no published agendas. And the reality is, generally, things will work out just fine. So the reality is, if you surround yourself with a community of very smart people, or smart companions, in the case of the doctor, this is more true than you might expect. I recently had an incident at Puppet Camp London in November, where we were in the Mary Ward House here in London. We were up on the top floor, and we broke for lunch. I sent everyone downstairs, and there was no lunch. They're like, oh, we thought you were having lunch at 1 o'clock. So I actually rounded everybody back up, sent them upstairs, rearranged the agenda, got a couple people to speak, and then waited for them to actually have lunch ready and sent everyone back downstairs. And it worked. I got like 1 complaint out of 300 people, which was pretty freaking awesome. Okay, so maybe we don't want to go quite as far as the Borg. Resistance is probably not actually futile, and we won't assimilate you against your will. But as far as communities are concerned, we really do want your biological and technological distinctiveness to be added to our own. New people and new ideas are actually what keep communities strong. But you also have to be a little bit careful not to assimilate too many people too quickly, because you really do need time to get those people absorbed into your culture. And if you add too many people at once, that can essentially destroy your culture, or your infrastructure won't hold up, or you won't have enough people to handle pull requests, or whatever type of community you have. So in most cases, you really want to gradually add people, assimilate them along with their ideas and their technology into your culture. And these people will bring new life into your community, and they can be a huge source of help. However, we also have to be a little careful not to treat our community members like minions. Community managers and project owners have to walk a pretty fine line between actually encouraging people to do the work needed by the community while not treating people like mindless work drones, because then they'll just leave and go away. So community members are individual people, and you should take the time to get to know your contributors and build strong relationships with them. This is why I'm traveling for 2 weeks, hitting as many events as I can in that time. I just finished a puppet camp in Amsterdam. I'm going to FOSDEM this weekend, and then we're doing a contributor summit for Puppet at the Configuration Management Camp in Ghent. So I've got a whole bunch of events squished together, and gives me some quality time to spend with our community. This is a science fiction classic here. In Brave New World, people are decanted instead of born. They're conditioned, basically brainwashed, to believe that everyone sort of belongs to everyone else and that acting as an individual is super offensive. However, there are a few groups of savages who are actually born on reservations. They don't have the conditioning the others have. Other people go rogue, and they assert their individuality despite their conditioning, and they're exiled to faraway islands as a result of this. Personally, living in a world or participating in a community where everybody behaves exactly the same way sounds awfully dull to me. I'd rather be sent to the island, actually, to hang out with the other awesome, crazy people who aren't good at conforming. And this is why I seek out communities of people who are doing something new and interesting. It's part of why I've worked with open source communities for the past dozen or so years. The people might be, just a wee bit crazy, but they're usually doing something pretty cool and interesting. Time Enough for Love is about Lazarus Long. He's 2,000 years old. He's a cynical old fart. He's not afraid to share his many, many opinions. One of these is that a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, kind of goes on and on like that for a while, and concludes with specialization is for insects. So the best community members and community managers are actually the ones who can help the community in a pretty wide variety of ways. While we do need people who have some special skills, it's really nice to have people that you can count on to step in and do just about anything that needs to be done. These are the people who answer questions on the mailing list or IRC. They jump in to help out with bugs. They submit patches. They write new documentation. They help organize events or user groups, speak at conferences about the project and the technologies, and step in to help out with anything else that people need. So these flexible, get-it-done types are incredibly valuable to have in the community. Personally, I've been waiting for transporter technology. Yeah, it would make travel a lot easier, but what I really want, I want to go back to Mom's house, and so she can make me margaritas and homemade apple pie. That's what I want it for. Most of us don't have anything quite as awesome as a transporter, but communities, especially open source communities, are a really great excuse to play with cool new technologies. There are new projects springing up to address, wide variety of problems or improve on things. The projects themselves can be based around fun technologies, but you can also use the community itself to learn new things. As part of building and maintaining communities over the years, I've done things like learned enough about Java to deploy the community software that we were using while I was at Jive Software. I've written little bits of Ruby code to automate metrics. Just a lot of random things, but it sort of gives me an excuse to play with some technology that I didn't know before and learn something in the process. So Ender's Game has Battle School, which is filled with young kids being trained to fight aliens. This training gives them some experience that is maybe a little more real than they realize at the time. Participation in open source communities gives people real-world experience, working on projects, working with groups of people. And because the work's out in the open, they can use it as kind of a real-life example to help build their resume and eventually get a job. And having this experience or having your work out in the open is way better than a resume. And as a bonus, most of the communities, or most of the companies that I've worked for hire out of the community. We've hired a shitload of people out of the Puppet community. And we continue to do so. And it's really beneficial if you have been in the community for a while and you know a bunch of employees who can be your advocate internally when that right job comes up. And it's been that way in most of the open source companies I've worked for. We hired a lot of people out of the community. So Teal'c isn't from Earth. And despite being a pretty valuable member of SG1, he sometimes doesn't get things quite right. However, his intentions are good. Most, sadly not quite all, but most community members have good intentions. But many of them also don't get things quite right either. So this is a big part of why we have things like community guidelines. The guidelines that I write are probably, honestly, a little too long, but I like to include specific tips for how to participate in specific parts of the community, so people who are maybe new to an open source project who don't know how to participate on mailing lists or IRC can get some tips for doing so without embarrassing themselves too much. I also include our event code of conduct and specific steps that we take when the guidelines are violated, so all that's kind of built in. And this helps people get more educated about what's appropriate and what's not, which hopefully leads to improvement. And too much of the time, honestly, people end up violating the guidelines, not out of malicious intent, but because they just don't think about how what they say or do actually impacts other people. So for a lot of them, you can point them to guidelines and they'll get it and they'll turn around, and there are others who are hopeless cases, but that's another story. So science fiction is filled with badass, strong women who can do anything. Become a fighter pilot, captain a ship, save the world. And we need more strong role models in technology. And so you can start by encouraging young women to actually get involved in technical communities and mentor them. If you haven't read, how many of you have read Ricky Ensley's article in Usenix last year, To My Daughter's High School Programming Teacher? Okay, not enough. The link is right there on the slide. I really recommend it. It's a really good example of how not to encourage young women. It's basically an example of how one high school class destroyed her daughter's enthusiasm for technology, probably permanently. It's a very good example of what not to do, and it shows how a bunch of things come together, and it's not just one thing that can really cut someone's enthusiasm for technology pretty quickly. And we need to get more women speaking at technology events. James does a fantastic job at this. He's better at this than I am by far, actually. It's something that we're working on a lot for our own events, for PuppetConf, for example. I think I failed last year. I think we only had maybe 5 or 6 women speaking. So see what we can do about that this year, but it's something that we can all work on. We don't want to go as far as Big Brother, but we do want to have metrics to measure what's happening in your community. Having great metrics helps you track progress, identify issues, but it can also help you recognize your top community members as well. Because the metrics basically help you look out across what's going on in your community and see what people are doing, and it often helps, you notice somebody who all of a sudden is participating a lot more in a particular area that you hadn't noticed before. And if you don't measure that, it's really hard to see. And my community metrics, so a lot of people focus their community metrics really around the numbers, so, charts that go up and to the right. I actually just kind of redone our community metrics to focus more on the people, because I want to know what the people are doing in the community, because that's, from my perspective, the important part. So first, being invisible seems pretty awesome. The invisible man quickly realizes that there are quite a few challenges. You can't carry anything with you because people see it floating and they kind of freak out. So you can't carry any money. And it's really, really cold when you aren't wearing any clothes. So community management, also not as easy as it seems at first glance. I do see a lot of people underestimating how challenging it is. There are people who think that community management is mostly about traveling to conferences, buying people beer, getting to hang out with people. I'll admit that, yes, I do get to do all those things, which is pretty fucking awesome. But I'm also the one who has to kick someone out of the community when they're not behaving. I'm the one that people escalate problems to all over the community. So any kind of crazy thing that's happening that shouldn't be, those get escalated to me, and I have to deal with them. I'm also the public face of the community when things go terribly wrong, which is, from experience, not an awesome place to be. But honestly, I still love it despite the challenges. It's a pretty cool gig. I've been doing it for a long time. And as a community manager, I've had a pretty fantastic opportunity to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, boldly go where only some have gone before. Thanks.
Thanks, Dawn. So
Yeah.
I think we could do some questions. And I have one immediately, if I can.
Yeah.
How is the puppet community different from other communities that you've been involved with?
Honestly, it's the nicest community of people I've ever managed.
Oh, yeah, you should.
No, seriously. I can tell you from experience, when I was at Intel, I would not have said that. Not that Intel doesn't have some good communities, but no, it really is. They're sort of self-policing. There was an example over Thanksgiving where a guy posted a really stupid question on the mailing list, and then somebody posted basically one of those Google links. Why don't you Google this links? I forget what those are called. And then somebody else was like, well, that's a really dick move. And then somebody else was like, hey, that's nice. You shouldn't call that a dick. That's not nice. You shouldn't call that a dick move. And then it ended with everyone apologizing in the thread, which any other community, I'm on vacation. I'm on a beach in Hawaii. It's over Thanksgiving holiday. But it was totally self-policing, and it ended with everybody apologizing and giving this guy some helpful advice, which doesn't happen in every community.
No, indeed. That happens in every community.
This isn't a question, it's a statement. There's a book by a lady called Amy Jo Kim on community management, and it really is the Bible. Sadly, it's nearly 10 years old. It's out for print, and it goes for big money on Amazon.
Recommendation that people read Amy Jo Kim on community management. You can't get hold of it, but it's really good.
It is really good. I've actually read it.
Scarcity always improves things.
Yeah, it's quite good.
I got that on
Sven.
How big is the community in Puppet?
How big is the community in Puppet? It depends on how you count it. That's, the challenge with open source communities. Our marketing team would tell you 80,000, and that's anybody who's ever downloaded anything from our website. I don't refer to that as community. So most of our biggest mailing list has, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 people on it. We've actually had 1,000 people contribute in some way to the GitHub repositories. So we have 193 repositories, so the Puppet stuff is spread out in a bunch of different repos, and we have had about 1,000 people contribute to those. So that gives you kind of a order of magnitude.
Stephen O'Grady has done some quite useful, that's my business partner over there, he's done some quite useful work tracking the sizes of these communities, and I keep wanting him to do that more. So if you'll encourage him to do that more, that would be good. So Ansible Salt, we want all of the stacks. He needs to provide all the metrics. So tell him to do that, please.
I would like to see it be a little more comprehensive. Since our stuff is spread out into so many repos, I think we were a little underrepresented in the most recent one.
Okay. Brian.
So I'm curious, you mentioned that you recently shifted your metrics to focus more on people. Can you elaborate on that?
Shifting metrics from people to something else.
Two people from just charts mostly. So I'm working with a company called Bitergia. They're out of Madrid. And they have kind of a standard dashboard, but one of the things that I had them expand was across every tool. So we have, right now we're tracking IRC, mailing lists, Jira, and the Git repositories. And what I asked them to do was to break it out into the top 50 contributors for the month, the year, and all time. So you can go to the IRC page on the metrics. We haven't published these yet. I think they're probably going to go live in another week or so. We're still working out a couple of bugs. But you can go to the basically the IRC section, look at participants, and see the top 50 for month, year, and all time. Yeah. Oh.
I noticed that you said... Thanks. I noticed that you said our community. Was that on purpose, or is the community sort of its own entity?
Is the community its own entity?
By...
It's not owned by, no, I don't feel like it's owned by Puppet Labs, but I do feel like, despite the fact that I'm an employee, I am a part of that community. So I consider myself part of our community. Our employees are part of the community. Lots of people are part of the community. So I refer to it as our community in the sense of all of us. Not our as in possessive. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
If they're talking about your product and say a competitor's product in a healthy way, it's like you're not trolling, etc., do you encourage that, or would you prefer it if they were just the community discussing your own product?
In case you didn't hear that, the question is, should you discourage people that are saying your stuff is not great?
No. If they're doing healthy comparison between products.
If it's a healthy comparison, I have no issues whatsoever with that. I tend to take a more hands-off approach maybe than some. I think that if you get too controlling, that generally backfires on you.
But it's working also for Oracle.
Yeah, it works great for them. If somebody was really spamming the community pretty hard with something, then it might be a different story, but I haven't had anything that I've felt like we needed to push back on when it comes to competitor stuff.
Cool. So, I think Dawn's going to be around for the rest of the day, I hope. And, learn from the best. Thank you.
Thank you.